Hey, Hamish, thanks for joining us today as a way of getting started. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a pitch consultant now. So what that means is, put quite simply, I help my clients win business. So how I got into this situation is I did accounting at university. I was in banking for a number of years and woke up one morning and thought, do I want to be a banker for the rest of my life? I thought maybe not. And I found a company called Rogan back in the day, and this was back in the late 90s. And what they were famous back then for helping Sydney win the Olympic Games. So even though I joined that company after they'd won the Olympic Games, I'd like to think I'm single-handedly responsible for the Olympic
Yeah.
Games going to Sydney.
You take credit for that. Huh?
Yeah, why not? But no, so that's where I learnt the art of pitching and what presentation skills training is all about, and analysing and assessing behaviour. And this was all in Australia. You can probably detect my accent. Moved over to London to help them grow their practice in London. I then got transferred to Canada and worked on a mega multi-billion-dollar pitch with a consortium of Accenture, American Express, Concur, and Bell Canada, and which was successful, and then ended up getting a contract with American Express. We did some fantastic work with American Express where we tripled their sales productivity, and it was sort of during that process that I established my own brand and developed my own company and wrote a book on pitching. And here I am today now with my business, Mackenzie Pitch Partners.
Cool. And what do you see people doing wrong?
Look, I think it starts first of all with what people actually define as a pitch. I ask the question quite often when I do keynote addresses, and I'll say, what's your definition, or how would you define a pitch? Because I think a lot of people will behave in terms of what they think. So a lot of people actually think a pitch sometimes is the actual PowerPoint deck. They'll actually pick it up and say, here's my pitch. A lot of people will think a pitch is a presentation, and these are sort of components of it. We define pitch as the effort that goes into winning a specific piece of business.
Okay.
So, if I'm working on a pitch to so-and-so, it could be 6 months in the journey, depending on what your sales cycle is, or it could be, if you're reacting to a pitch, meaning responding to an RFP, then that falls on your lap. Then that pitch really is over that month period in terms of, the time frame of the RFP. But, I would strongly recommend, if you can not avoid RFPs, is avoid it and go into a proactive pitch. And that is where you specifically identify a target. You make that target aware of the fact that you want to do business with them, and then design a plan in terms of how you prepare to pitch to win them, to win a specific piece of business from them. So
Cool.
I think that's where it starts, Brian, is, people don't really understand, what pitching really is.
Yeah, I think people, get the slide deck from marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and they feel obligated to show every slide.
Mm-hmm.
And they think of it as kind of a single direction
Mm-hmm.
towards people,
Yep.
and about an hour long, and it doesn't really connect with people.
I mean, and if you think about it, you're absolutely right. And you ask people, how do you go about your pitch preparation? And pretty much, let's get the last PowerPoint deck that I used, dust it off, change a few names and logos and things, and away you go. Whereas, what I say is, well, the first thing that you need to do is understand who you're pitching to. Individuals make decisions, not companies. So, you've got to try and, that's the whole art of sales, is you've got to try and get inside that decision maker's head. And it starts to get more complex where there's more than one decision maker. So you've got to work out who are the main decision makers and what percentage of influence they have, and not only understand. And you got to think way beyond an RFP, and you got to think way beyond even what the decision makers say sometimes, because as JP Morgan says, people buy things for two reasons: the right reason and the real reason. So there's rational and emotional. So the pitching all of a sudden starts to become, there's an art and a science to it. I think there is a lot of companies that have the science down, but I don't know that they really understand the art involved in terms of the psychology, in terms of really understanding the psychology behind buying decisions.
That's it, because the more I learn, the more I see, I don't know if you've heard the term outward mindset, is
Mm-hmm.
the ability to think outside of your own need, wants,
Yeah.
desires, and kind of to build empathy. Because
Yep.
until you have that mindset, you're not curious about
Yep.
what they care about.
Mm-hmm.
People will read their website, their 10K, And
Yeah.
I never read a single one,
Yeah.
a single 10K,
Yeah.
because I don't think the people inside the company know those things. I think they all have objectives, things that they care about.
Yeah.
What's
You know,
going to
I ran an interesting experiment, and I did this with a group at American Express. So I developed a pitch scenario. Okay. So there was a pitch scenario, and I divided the groups into three groups. Now, group one had like the annual report, had all the 10K, had every information you could possibly understand about the company. Okay, that was group one. Group two didn't have any information about the company, but I gave them what I call a thank you email. And the thank you email said, dear client, we really appreciate meeting with you last week. We understand your overall priority at the moment is such and such, and the specific needs that you need are A, B, and C. So it was just a single piece of paper, but it was about the needs of the specific individual, right? So they had that. Then group three had all the literature, all the 10K and all the annual report and all of that stuff, plus they had the email, okay? So I had those three groups, and then I went and sort of coached them all how to prepare and everything. Have a guess, Brian, which group actually won the pitch?
I would say the ones that wrote the note.
Yeah, absolutely. So group two, where they just had the single piece of paper that just tackled the individual's decision maker needs. And, the other teams that had all the information pretty much went through their standard approach. It was a very standard approach, whereas just through that single piece of paper that identified the needs, that team were really able to craft a customized message and a customized pitch for the individual.
So, what is the journey you take your clients through when they come to you?
So the journey I take them through is a process, and first of all, I'm glad that you said journey, because if we think about going back to the definition of pitch again, is the effort that goes into winning a specific piece of business. Okay, so I start today, and my pitch, or my presentation, if you like it, to confirm the pitch is in a month's time. So that means you've got a number of things to do. And as William Edwards Deming says, if you can't describe what you do as a process, then you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So the process that we operate to has three phases, and each phase has three steps. And the three phases are strategy, story, presentation. So strategy is, first of all, working out why you're going to be successful. So why am I actually going to win this pitch? And in order to do that, that's where you've got to analyze the audience, the decision makers. So, work out you get an organizational structure of the decision-making process, and put down what's my relationship with these individuals, what percentage of influence do I think this individual has. You go through each of their rational and emotional needs, and I do a deep dive on the individual if I think they've got greater than 20% influence. Also, you need to work out and determine how are you perceived against the competitors. So what's your perception of what I do compared to my competitors? There's no point going to marketing and getting the competitor analysis, because that's way too rational. It's all about the perception in the client's mind of your products and services. So these are all the ingredients to work out how you're going to be successful. So you come up with a winning argument, or you come up with what your strategy is to win. Then what you've got to think about is, okay, how do I now communicate this? I've got the successful strategy. How do I communicate this? And as you know, it's very in vogue at the moment. You've got to tell a story. So you work on telling a story about why you should be successful. We operate very much to the power of three, because, society's built on three. There's 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, do, re, mi, past, present, future, high, medium, low, gold, silver, bronze. Life, liberty, happiness, all of these things. The new Mac Air book, lighter, thinner, faster. All of these things come in three. Neuro-linguistic programmers will confirm to you that the cognitive retentive capacity of an individual is limited to three. So if you're communicating, and I challenge all the listeners, go to your last PowerPoint deck. If you've got an agenda of more than 3 items, you're not communicating in an effective way.
First slide.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't structure, and they just go through slides.
Yeah.
But if you think about telling a story now, I always say, if in doubt, here's a great structure for a story, and it's your needs, our solution, making it happen. Okay? Because the story goes, first of all, let me confirm we understand your needs. What are we here for? What's this all about? What do we have to achieve for you? That's the first thing. Secondly, when we've gone through that and we've confirmed we've got a good understanding of your needs, what we're going to do is we're going to present our solution. And importantly, a solution that meets your needs. And the third and last area that we want to talk about is making it happen. And that's where we're going to provide you assurance that we will deliver on you and that we will deliver on this solution, which of course in turn is going to meet your needs. Now, you got to argue that's not a bad structure for pitching a solution, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, American Express, where we achieved some outstanding success in terms of taking their win rate to where they were winning 7 to 8 deals out of 10, they would say that structure was a significant impact on that result, because the discipline of always starting a presentation off with your needs really anchored the presentation and got the client and started talking about the client straight away rather than talking about yourself. I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen presentations where they just start talking about themselves straight away. So that's the second phase. So, you know, strategy phase 1, then phase 2 is to work out your story. And then, yes, phase 3 is the presentation. And this is pretty much where you rehearse and you practice. And that's not a question of practice because you're not a good presenter. This is all about practice telling this story.
Yeah.
And typically pitches, you know, for in B2B, there will be more than one person. So how does that team bond together and tell a seamless story? So you get one team selling one story rather than a bunch of individuals telling mini presentations, which often happens again. So that's the process that we operate to, Brian: strategy, story, structure.
And how important is how they do it versus just what they do? Because
Look, yeah, look, that's a good question. And, you know, I would say to all listeners here is be very careful with my answer, okay? Because there's many different things that go into a pitch, and you've got to think in terms of grey rather than black and white.
yeah,
So first of all, if you remember that process that I talked about, you develop your what through your strategy and the story, obviously. There's no doubt about that. And you've got to have some good substance for your presentation. You can't think that you're going to win business by putting a coat of paint on a dilapidated house. Okay, so if you just focus on the presentation and presentation only in terms of delivery, then you know you're running a risk because you haven't really addressed the client's needs. Okay, so that's one aspect I want everybody to think strongly about. Talking about the how-to, yes, I think the Wharton Business School years ago did a survey, and they asked executives from Fortune 500 companies, you know, what was the last pitch you were involved in where you were actually in the audience, and what was it that made the biggest impression? Now, they got a lot of different responses, and they pulled those responses under 3 different categories, and that is the what, the who, and the how. So, because they just bundled it all together. So the what were basically the words, the content. The who is pretty much the relationship or the title of the individual. You find that, you know, if a CEO goes in to present just having CEO on his or her business card, that has a huge impact. Or reputation, those things have a huge, you know, if you were interviewing Bill Clinton, for example, who's, you know, one of the great presenters of all time, you know, he may have a little bit more who factor than me at the moment, Brian. Just a
maybe.
just a little bit, maybe. Okay. And then the how, in terms of, you know, your question, there's so many different things. It's use of voice. It's, you know, what I'm wearing, facial expressions, how I'm using my eyes, the energy, the enthusiasm, all of those things come into the banner of the how. Now, in that survey, they said 7% related, in terms of overall impression from their survey, 7% related to the what, 40% related to the who, 53% related to the how. Now, look, that's just one survey in isolation. The moral of that story is to make sure that you put the right allocated effort in the presentation, in the how. And Brian, it's not through presentation skills training, it's through practice.
Yeah.
I think presentation skills training is so overused, and it's not really tackling the absolute issue. You know, for some of the monster pitches that I work on, I'll allocate up to 2 days of rehearsal, but it's all practice, and I do maybe 1 hour of presentation skills around eye contact, use of voice, and pause, and that's about it. And the more they practice, the more the how really comes into vogue, because they're getting more comfortable. And in terms to bring the how out too, in your rehearsal process, you need to first of all get comfortable with content. And when I've got comfortable with content, when I'm about 80% comfortable with content, that's when you start worrying about delivery. And I'll be pretty brutal in rehearsals too with my clients, because If they start bringing up delivery issues in a first or a second rehearsal, I'll say, let's just park that. Let's not worry about that at all. Let's just get the story straight and work out that the story is persuasive, has got the right order and flow, and is the right evidence. And then when we've got that, then we'll go through some of the choreographing, work out where we're going to be sitting and how you coordinate and link it all up so you get that seamless impression. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And the people who are really good at it, are they the ones that can really grab the emotion? Like you brought up Bill Clinton. I think he's clearly one of those people that can connect. I met him.
Oh, did you? Good.
By accident.
Okay.
I was on a bike ride and I stopped at this place and him and a bunch of people were having brunch in Georgetown. Yeah. And what was unique about him is he came over and shook everyone's hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And his wife went right into the limo. So he had this natural desire to connect with people.
Yeah. I mean, look, you said it there, and it's natural. And I think this is a bit of a misconception too, because a lot of people think you've got to be like an Anthony Robbins or, a big rah-rah person to pitch. Now, if you look at Bill Clinton, who, yes, was one of the most persuasive people, but and if you really study him, number one, he wasn't that good to start with. So a lot of what he's done has been through learnt skills.
Yeah.
But the impression that he creates is very natural and very genuine. He's just like the guy next door sort of thing. He's not this big rah-rah guy. Now, at the time, if you compare him to Tony Blair would over-gesture, would put different emphasis on different words kind of thing, and almost went into presentation mode. I'm sure the way he presented wasn't like how he was in a meeting, in an internal meeting in his cabinet or anything like that, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
So we saw a different person, whereas Bill Clinton, you don't get that sensation. Barack Obama is a master presenter too. But to his detriment, he's almost too good because he's almost coming across a little too slick, whereas Bill Clinton was able to keep that natural ability. And I think they're the best presenters. Let's come back to the stage of winning business.
Yeah.
People are looking across the table and they're saying, do I want to work with that person?
Right.
So if you've got someone who's over the top or, puts on this big presenter mode, it's too much. And conversely too, if you've got someone who goes into monotone and, you're asleep in the first 30 seconds, that ain't going to cut it either. So, be natural. And I say to people, how would you be in a meeting when you're just being yourself? Yeah. Why don't you be that person? Because that's really who they're buying.
That's it. And how about as far as digging up the emotion that will cause them to buy the product, the real desire, as opposed to just the logic and the facts and the figures? Because, people do buy emotionally and there is a personal win, but that sometimes you can't overtly present that. You have to.
So let's do an exercise, Brian. I'm going to treat you as my prospective client. Okay. All right. I'm just going to probe and just going to ask you a couple of questions and just answer normally. There's no tricks to it at all. I'm just going to use a probing technique called what, which, why. Okay. So Brian, hypothetically speaking, if you were to engage and to consider investing in some pitch consultation, okay? And let's say, hypothetically speaking, again, too, the products that you're offering are of a reasonable long sales cycle. It could be up to 6 months or even longer. So we're sort of, significant business to business endeavor. To get a pitch consultant in to start off with, in the first 3 months, what are 3 indicators that you would look at to assess the merits of your investment in the pitch consultation? Does that make sense? So what are 3 indicators you'd look for?
I would look for somebody who understood my market, could help me clearly connect with my clients, get them focused on the outcomes that they want versus the, who am I? What do I do? How much does it cost?
Yep. And a third one?
Just somebody I could communicate with, that when I say something that it makes sense to them, and when they say something, I understand. Could
I say good rapport?
Yes.
Okay, so good. So out of those 3, so that's the first question. Second question is, out of those 3, and the 3 are, you'd need to make sure that I understood your market and understood the business that you're in. Secondly, you'd have to make sure that I was client focused, that I helped you get more focused on the client. And thirdly, you'd have to make sure that there was good rapport between us, kind of thing.
Yeah.
hypothetically speaking, if I could only prove to you that one of those things were there, which one would you choose?
Um, it would probably get more client focused.
More client
Right?
focused. Okay, get more client focused. Brian, so here's the third question, which is the why question. And this is what it's all about. About, why is that the outcome and why you chose that again over the other two?
Because that's what I'm trying to achieve. Yeah, but even though now I'm thinking about it, if I don't have that rapport with the person, I'm not going to be able to get that
Mm-hmm.
because you won't be on the same page or on
Mm-hmm.
the same
Mm-hmm.
level.
Okay. So what's just happened then is I've got you to actually stop and think. And
Yeah,
I've actually dived into your head and actually got you to stop and think, okay, what's it really going to take? And and I don't think it's a manipulative technique. It's just a technique to provide a bit of
conversation.
criteria, but
Yeah,
then get to the heart of the matter. And, you were heading down the right direction. So here's a classic example of going from rational to emotional. So you went from rational, all right, where you talked about, well, helping the client, get in front of the client. And I pushed you a little bit more.
yeah,
I pushed you and I said, well, hang on, why is that one more important than the others? And then you sort of came clean with me emotionally because you sort of said, well, it's really got to be a good rapport. If I don't like the person, if I can't connect with the person, I'm not going to like it. So there you go. If I were now pitching to you, I think, before the end presentation, all my interactions with you would be way more important because I'd have to make sure that, we personally got along and I'd probably do a bit more investigation, etc. So that's why you sort of look at the whole pitching journey, if you
yeah.
like, because in my situation, if I knew I had a good rapport with you, I would suspect I would probably have won the deal before I actually presented, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I like how you used the hypothetical preface to the question,
Yeah.
which didn't put me on,
Yes.
even though it
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Right?
I think, I was just having breakfast with someone. He said one of the things that you do is you've got some good terminology that you use. So, hypothetically speaking, will make feel people a lot more comfortable, kind of thing.
Yeah,
Another good technique is in a sales situation, again in the pitch journey. And if someone says, "Oh, well, I'd need to see this, I'd need to see that," I might say, "Well, let me share a perspective with you." And rather than say, if I get into a situation where I say, well, this is what you have to do, that's immediately going to put people on the defense. But
yeah,
if you just sort of share some ideas and, well, here's a perspective. It's worked before. It may work, it may not work, but, potentially it could be something you might want to think about. So see how submissive I've turned my language there, but it puts the other person at ease to make them want to volunteer more information, which is what it's all about.
and I think that's very helpful because most people will present a case study or a story as the model, right?
Yes, exactly. And
Instead of
and
just one alternative.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. And that's where people get too enamored with credentials and case studies. Look, case studies are very, very important,
But
but
yeah,
case studies are only good if you make them relative
yeah,
to the person you're talking about. And that's where structure comes into it. If I'm presenting a case study, situation, solution, outcome is a great mini structure for a case study. Situation being the most important thing because that's where you draw the relevance. Let me talk about ABC because there was a similar situation to your situation there. So this is what we did to solve their situation, and here was the outcome.
and that's it. And you brought up NLP, and in NLP they have the mismatchers,
Okay.
right? The people that no matter what you say, they say the opposite.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's always going to be one in the room, right?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes, Brian, you have to, and this is again part of your strategy and your audience analysis. You may need to change salespeople because you've got someone who just can't bridge that rapport gap.
Yes.
I will never forget a situation where my partner came back to the office and she was fairly flamboyant, designer label dress, very well put together. She just met with someone in banking who was stock standard, not an expensive suit, by the book sort of person. She came in and she was a great salesperson, but she came in
Yeah.
and said, okay, Tim, you're on that file. There is no way that person is buying anything from me,
Yeah.
because that mismatch straight away. So that's a
That
good
happens
comment.
all the time. Hey,
Mhm.
so tell us about your book.
Yeah, so my book is called Pitch, What You're Not Doing That Makes All the Difference. And I mean, I'll say that's another important thing in pitching too. If you don't tell me why I should be listening, I will make my own assumptions. So I wrote the book with that theme to it because I want people to pick it up and go, well, all right, well, what am I not doing?
Yeah.
So I've got them immediately looking through the lens I want them to look at. And, it basically describes in a lot more detail the strategy, story, presentation, just in a bit more of a fun way. So it's a standard operating procedure for pitch preparation, but just written with a lot of anecdotes and a lot of stories and case studies of my research in terms of learning what works and what doesn't work.
And what's the best modality to get it? Is it Kindle? Is it paperback,
Uh,
hardback, Audible?
So it's all on an electronic copy, so you can get it through all of those means that you talked about. If anybody wants a hard copy, then look at our website. Look at Google Mackenzie Pitch Partners, find our website, and you can order it direct from there as well. And we'll send you however many copies that you want.